I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show.
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
CJ, at the beginning of the week, it did not look possible. I didn't think so. You definitely didn't think so. But the Bruins and Leafs, Saturday night in Boston, Game 7. How did we get here?
I mean, the Leafs got up off the mat. There's no other way to put it. You know, where they were after Saturday night's game last weekend, you know, bickering on the bench, didn't have Auston Matthews available for the third period of that game. And obviously we now know subsequently the two games afterwards, down and out, thoroughly outplayed, no answers in goal. All of a sudden it flipped. And, you know, it's been quite something to see. I think not just that they forced the Game 7, it's for me the way they forced it. You know, particularly Game 6 last night, I thought that's about as good a defensive game as I can remember almost any Leafs team playing in my years being around them. Just the commitment from the top guys blocking shots, you know, William Nylander throwing hits. You know, he had 3 hits credited in the game, and I think he had 32 hits the entire regular season credited. So, I mean, you do the math on that. He's averaging less than half a hit a game in the regular season in 3 in one night, and then obviously 2 big goals to help them, you know, squeak out a 2-1 win. So, you know, obviously I didn't see this coming. If you subscribe to The Athletic and you follow my work, you will know that I wrote a story that has the title, This is the End of the Maple Leafs as We Knew Them, published last Saturday night or early Sunday morning. And here they are with a chance to be, I mean, in a weird way, it was not what I was intended at that article, but this could be the end of the Maple Leafs as we knew them too, if they come back and win this series and do something that most wouldn't have expected, to do it potentially without Auston Matthews being available. You know, would be quite something. So, you know, I don't really know what's going to happen. I don't think anyone does. I think that's the beauty of going to a Game 7 in Boston. And I was just thinking, this will be the 5th Game 7 I've attended at TD Garden. So,
Oh my God.
3 previous, obviously, with the Leaf series, 2013, 2018, 2019, and then the 2019 Cup final was decided there in Game 7 between St. Louis and the Bruins. So it's going to be quite a spectacle. The 3rd Saturday night game of the series, like just everything, it's kind of weird. And I'm working on an article today, actually, and I talked to one of the Leafs' former assistant coaches, Andrew Brewer, and he was saying the Boston crowd on a Saturday is much different than a Boston crowd on a Wednesday, Thursdays. Like his words were, they get after it. And I think we're going to have quite a memorable game one way or another, you know, in another Game 7 at TD.
I want to focus on that Boston atmosphere and the mood, but I do want to ask about Auston Matthews, because since the last time we did an episode, you're right, he has not been a factor. He hasn't been playing. What do we know about what he's going through right now?
I don't know specifics. You know, obviously it's an injury that stemmed from when he had an illness earlier in the series. I think, you know, that's probably where some of the confusion came from, because he played through an illness in Game 3 and into Game 4 and then suffered some sort of ailment, injury, something. And, you know, I believe the two are sort of semi-related. That's the best I can do for you. I don't have the exact condition he's in or what's going on, but I can tell you the impression I have right now is that he's not going to play Game 7. I would never say he's 100% out, because certainly he hasn't been ruled out that I'm aware of. And, you know, we know what the playoffs can do. I mean, players and teams and medical staffs find a way to get guys in games that they just simply wouldn't play any other time of year under any other circumstances. So, you know, I do believe that in some ways it's Austin's call to a certain degree, that if he feels that he could somehow gut it through the game, I think he would get in there. But, you know, obviously he's dealing with something significant, because, you know, he just missed the final 20 minutes of a Game 4, a Game 5 with his team facing elimination, a Game 6 with his team facing elimination. And, you know, I will say this, I've been given pretty good assurances, if the Leafs find a way to move on, either with or without him, that there's every reason to expect he'd be, a player in the second round for the Leafs. So I'm sure that's all that's being weighed behind the scenes. Obviously, looking out for the person and his health first and foremost, but then can they get through another game? Can they win another game without him? Because obviously buying him even another 4, 5, 6, 7 days, and he can enter early in the second round, could be beneficial to his condition. So, I don't expect him to play, but man, stranger things have happened. So, I'll be there for the morning skate on Saturday to see if he can skate. I mean, I should point out he has not gone through a full skate yet with his teammates. He skated on his own each of the last 3 days, but hasn't been part of the practices or the sort of more formal team skates, which is, an indication he's generally a ways off. I mean, typically when a player comes back from injury, as there's kind of a progression in ramping up what they're doing in that return to play. And usually it would involve at least one sort of full skate, but there's two issues with that. Teams don't practice as much in the playoffs, so there might not really be that opportunity afforded them. And then second, of course, is just the urgency of the situation, what's on the line for the Leafs. And, I'm sure it just killed them to watch those last two games in particular, especially with how the team played and the fact that they really were full value for wins. And I think they've shifted a lot of pressure over to the Bruins. If you're in Auston Matthews' situation, you played an 81 game regular season, you scored 69 goals, you're kind of, part of the heartbeat and fabric of the team. I'm sure there's a real pull to want to play, but you also don't want to go out there and hurt your team and potentially do maybe more damage to yourself. And so this is why the playoffs are so hard. It's not just an Austin situation. I mean, we know there's injuries all around the league. Tampa played 5 games in the first round. I saw when they did their breakdown day, it was just like a laundry list of ailments that their players were dealing with. It doesn't get any easier for any of the teams still playing now. And so, we'll just have to see what happens for game 7. But I would say I'm not flying down to Boston today expecting I'll see Auston Matthews in uniform when puck drops at 8 p.m. Eastern on Saturday night.
Even then, the Leafs have found a way to play without Auston Matthews and one guy who has stood out in these last few games, Joseph Woll. What can you tell us about that story and how that's unfolding in front of our very eyes?
It's funny. Joseph Woll's kind of been the Leafs goalie of the future, I guess, for a couple of years now. And obviously what you're seeing is him becoming the goalie of the present for them. And, that extends to no matter what happens in game 7, if that ends up being the last game of their season, I would just say going into next year, he's even more a fixture in their plans. The Leafs don't have any other NHL caliber goalies signed for next year. Ilya Samsonov, Martin Jones, Matt Murray are all pending unrestricted free agents. So, obviously they're going to either have to re-sign one or more of those players or go out and get another goaltender. But, Woll will enter next year with the possibility of shouldering the load. And he's given the Leafs a lot of good games in the past, or maybe a lot is overstating it just because he hasn't played that many, but he has played at a high level for the Leafs already. It's just, you haven't seen him be able to get that rhythm either because he wasn't getting frequency of starts or, he's gone through some injuries. And especially this year, was really trending in the right direction. Then he has a high ankle sprain. He's out of the lineup for an extended period of time. He didn't really ever get it back fully, I would say, when he returned in February or so. And Samsonov was kind of cooking by then. So, the starts were few and far between. The Leafs had to win games. Remember coming out of the All-Star break, they only had a couple point cushion on the playoff cutoff line. So, I guess it's a long way of saying I'm not surprised to see him get here. It's just, you couldn't have predicted it would come in this manner because, he only started 3 of the last 10 games in the season. He gets thrown into a do or die game in game 5. Like, you just don't know what to expect. Right. And the fact he's been at this level, he's allowed 2 goals in the 7 periods he's played in the series. And one of them was scored, quite frankly, when it looked like the game was over, 0.1 seconds left in game 6, Morgan Geekie shoots it in his net. But the Leafs were already celebrating. I'm not excusing it, but I'm just saying they've really Boston's beat him with one shot where he was set and playing the puck in 7 periods. So that's a huge swing in events. I mean, there's lots of things we can point to that have turned the series for the Leafs, but that might be the biggest individual one. I mean, the team is definitely defending better in front of them than they were earlier in the series when Samsonov was playing, but he hasn't let in a bad goal yet. He hasn't made a mistake. And I think that's allowed the Leafs to really get some momentum in the series. Jeremy Swayman's been awesome at the other end of the ice. I mean, even in defeats, it's hard to really fault him. I mean, Nylander beats him on a clear breakaway, and the other one, it's a bad bounce. It deflects it off his defenseman. Nothing you really can expect the goaltender to do in either situation. Obviously, you can stop a breakaway, but he just stopped a breakaway on Max Domi about 2 minutes before Nylander scored. So, the Woll emergence has allowed the Leafs to get comfortable, I think, and to play free. And it's quite a story. I mean, this is what teams need. I mean, Matthew Knies is probably one of the Leafs' best players, certainly in the last couple games as well. And he's a younger guy. I wouldn't say he had a bad first full NHL season, but it was up and down. He was adjusting to a schedule twice as long as the NCAA, where he'd been playing previously. Dealing with everything that comes with that, the mental challenges, the physical challenges. I think figuring out what he can do or what he shouldn't do on the ice. And all of a sudden, the series starts and the temperature gets turned up to 100 degrees, and he's shining. I mean, you almost feel like he's growing before your eyes. I think the same about Woll's game, and those guys have been two huge contributors in helping push this team forward. I mean, Nylander has the game-breaking moments, the goals, but those guys have made a lot of plays, and obviously Nye scored the overtime winner, and Woll made 4 saves in the first 2 minutes of that Game 5 overtime, or the series is over there before we ever get a chance to see everything that's played out since. And so, this is why we love the playoffs, is the unpredictable nature, and then obviously sometimes some players that especially if you're not following the Leafs on a day-to-day basis, maybe you don't know a lot about these guys. I mean, they're getting their moment to really shine here under pretty big spotlight and lots of pressure too.
That spotlight is also burning on the Boston Bruins, who it feels like they're living in deja vu. They're basically going through what they went through last year against the Florida Panthers in the first round. Can you describe as best as you can what the mood has been like around this team, from the media, from the fan standpoint, even from the players and head coach Jim Montgomery?
It's been weird is the best way I can put it, Julian. I've covered a lot of the Leafs over the years, right? I live in Toronto. In my old role, I used to kind of be a beat writer, essentially covering that team. So, I'm used to teams kind of having to deal with the idea of demons or things that happened in the past, like getting those kind of questions. I'm not used to seeing it asked of a Leafs opponent, especially when they're up in a series. And, when we were at TD for Game 5, I noticed that, they lose a 2-1 game in overtime. Granted, the Bruins stunk the first period. They were brutal in that game. And so, it's an elimination game without the opponent missing their top center. And you come out and have 2 shots in the entire first period against a rookie goaltender or an inexperienced goaltender. I can understand in a sense why the heat got turned up on them, but it was almost like everybody was saying, here we go again. And it's like, they only lost the 1 game. It's like they still have 2 more potential closeout opportunities. They're definitely dealing with the weight of last season. It's hard to measure to the degree that the players feel it. I mean, certainly they don't appreciate the questions. You can sense that. They're giving different answers. Brad Marchand at one point in the series was saying, we're in the moment. We're not even thinking about that. And then Jim Montgomery before Game 6 was like, oh yeah, we talked about it yesterday. We've moved past that. We've grown through it. It just feels that they're not quite sure how to manage that. And, quite frankly, Jim Montgomery might be coaching for his job in Game 7. I don't think that's, it's crazy to say because he's only his second season in Boston, and the first one they set a NHL record for regular season performance. But, they could be the first team ever in any of the North American professional sports to blow 3-1 leads in consecutive springs. And, certainly Montgomery's faced at some pointed questions from the Bruins media about, decision to switch up a Game 5 lineup after, 2 pretty dominant performances and 2 wins in Toronto. I don't think you can question his goaltending decisions, switching away from the alternating goalies to Swayman, even with them losing the last 2 games, as I say, I don't think you can pin those on Swayman, but they're all going to have to stare that in the mirror. And the sort of rule of thumb is you would always want to play Game 7 on home ice. I mean, it might be kind of a weird environment because they lost that Game 7 to Florida on home ice last year. They're actually leading into the final 2 minutes and gave up a late goal in regulation and then lost in overtime. And I just feel like there's going to be a little bit of uncertainty in the air. There's certainly going to be more questions before the puck's dropped on the game, as they get home to the Boston media on Friday and asking about those demons. And so it's funny, 2 teams really that kind of carry some ghosts. And I know obviously the game's played with the current players. But there is, sometimes that external conversation finds its way in the walls a little bit, right? It might actually plant a seed of doubt. And the Leafs I will say, has seized on this right from the moment they went down 3-1. I mean, they put out a video, where they award their player of the game. And Ryan Reeves said in the dressing room in game 5, is like, we planted the seed. Let's go home and water it. Something to that effect. Now I'm sure Toronto feels, they're going into game 7 with momentum. Momentum doesn't always carry from game to game, but I think it's two vastly different feelings for the teams entering that game. And Boston laid another stinker in the first period of game 6. And so if they only play part of the game, or if the Leafs are able to sort of seize in the early stages of game 7, I mean, the momentum that I think of that's usually worked in the Bruins' favor at the game 7s I've been to could turn against them. And so it's, this is compelling. I mean, one way or another, either the Leafs are going to have a 4th season in the last 12 years end on game 7 in Boston, or the Bruins are going to become the first team ever to blow back-to-back 3-1 series leads. I mean, we're guaranteed to see something you don't see a lot of, or doesn't happen. It's not what you expect to happen. And it's going to be a memorable game. That's the thing about game 7s. You usually remember them because even if you have a long career, you only get to so many. I mean, it's just a real special vibe. And I'm kind of stunned that I'm packing today, because I'll tell you, I was thinking when I went down for game 5, it felt like the air was out of the balloon for the Leafs. And so just goes to show nothing's over till it's over. And maybe there's a lesson there even for a veteran sports writer about how to approach covering these things.
Last Leafs Bruins question before we get to some other news and notes around the league. Are you ready to eat your words if the Leafs win game 7? I mean, I'm going to have to eat some of that too, but are you ready for the phone to blow up if the Leafs win game 7?
Absolutely. I think you walk through the front door, as I say, you own your stuff. And, I counted them out essentially. I mean, I did put a caveat in the story. I said, unless there's an unlikely or unexpected comeback in the offing here, I mean, this is kind of the end of the Leafs as we know them. I actually stand by that thinking. It didn't feel like they had a comeback in them. It didn't look like the circumstances were in their favor. And I do think if they had a lost game 5 on Tuesday, it would be a pretty monumental moment for the organization of soul searching, and there would certainly be fallout. I don't know how much that changes if they lose a game 7 now. I mean, certainly they've shown a lot of fight to push it to this point and to win the games without Matthews, to kind of win the games in the manner they have. I mean, those are 2 grinding playoff wins. I mean, I saw a few people commenting, like, if you don't have a horse in this fight, this is tough hockey to watch. I mean, because the teams really, they're not trading chances. You're seeing players eat pucks. It's a battle out there. It's a slog. It's what I think of when I think of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Quite frankly, it's really hard to win these games, and the Leafs have pulled out 2 sort of by the narrowest of margins. So I will 1,000% eat my words. I'll own my shit. If they win, and look at, even if they end up losing, I mean, they could lose in overtime and play great. Maybe to some degree, I should still be eating my words because, I was judging them based on what I'd seen through 5 games and the picture or 4 games, I guess, at the time. And the picture does look a little different here through 6, and probably going to look a little different one way or another after Saturday night's final buzzer sounds.
Man, jealous you get to cover that game.
This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is brought to you by Babbel. The best way to learn a language is through immersion, living where the language is spoken and using it every day. But if that's not in the cards, you can still learn a language the second best way, and that's with Babbel. 1 in 5 Americans have learned a new language on their bucket list. If that's you, make 2024 the year you finally check it off the list with Babbel. It's a really great app to use where you are able to learn all these different languages, and you don't have to pay hundreds of dollars for different tutors or waste hours on apps that don't really help you speak the language. Babbel has 10-minute lessons that are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove that Babbel is better. One study even found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. That's pretty good. Here's a special limited time deal for our listeners. Right now, get 55% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/Johnston. Get 55% off at babbel.com/Johnston. That's spelled BABBEL.com/Johnston patreon.com/Johnston.
Let's bounce around the league before we get to stick taps here. Let's talk about a team that won't be playing in a Game 6 or a Game 7 for the rest of this spring. The Winnipeg Jets, down in 5 against the Colorado Avalanche. Did you get to catch any of the locker clean-out reaction, specifically from Connor Hellebuck, who may have felt he played his best hockey of this series? It's just the goals against just isn't helping him. But, of course, the Jets didn't really help him in that series either.
Yeah, I mean, the roof caved in on Winnipeg, right? And it was pretty stunning because of, one of the best or the best defensive team in the league through the regular season. I mean, we know what the Avalanche are all about at their best. I mean, it's not just producer Drew keeping an eye on that team. They are a wagon. They are so fast. Their power play is deadly. They have players that can, that feast on you. And, they're pretty experienced. Like their main guys, have been there since that 2022 Stanley Cup. And I think, have gained something through that experience together. And so, I wouldn't have guessed that it would go down quite the way it did with Winnipeg, just with all those goals going behind Hellebuck. And I did catch his comments. I mean, I think Connor Hellebuck, he's always known for speaking his mind, a very bright guy. And I'll take him at his word that was his best. I mean, certainly, you don't like the way the numbers look, but it's only 5 games. And, it's things can skew in extremes over 5 games, positive or negative for you if that's all your playoff season lasts. But, he did say something to the effect of, I can't do it on my own. And I think it's an interesting offseason in Winnipeg. I think they had a good year. Honestly, I know the disappointment is probably still fresh around that organization, but, from where they started the year, signing Hellebuck and Scheifele to those extensions while we were recording an episode,
yes.
In training camp, and not a lot of hope, I would say, or not like outside the walls. I don't think they were viewed as that big of a threat. They had a strong regular season, and they saw where the standard is now, and the playoffs are hard. So, I think that it'd be interesting to see what happens with Rick Bowness. It sort of sounded like he would want to come back, but obviously, a very tenured guy. What directions they go, how they approach their free agency. They traded for a couple of players to Foley. Dylan DeMello is a pending UFA. I mean, there's questions, like any team faces questions, but I feel for the people in Winnipeg. That was a tough first round matchup, and that's kind of the way it goes. I mean, you have a great year, and then Vegas gets Dallas, there's different first round matchups, right? I mean, we saw a little different in the Metropolitan Division. Washington and the Islanders, claimed those last 2 spots. They were relatively easy fodder for the teams at the top, but there's still a lot of parity in the league, and Colorado could very easily win another cup here. They looked great in that first round.
Absolutely. Let's talk about another team that lost in 5, the Los Angeles Kings, specifically one player who did not have a good season, Pierre-Luc Dubois. I saw a lot of people yesterday going on his cap-friendly page and wondering about buying him out. He just finished the first year of a big contract with the Los Angeles Kings. Is that even a realistic possibility?
I don't know how realistic it is, because there's 7 years left on the deal, and if you buy it out, it's a 14-year cap charge. So,
yes,
in very isolated cases in the past, we've seen something similar to that, but it really is not the way teams would typically choose to behave. And, stick tap to our friend Hart at Puckpedia, he put out kind of the scenario here whereby, Pierre-Luc Dubois turns 26 at the end of June. And that's only significant because there's a buyout if your player is under 26, and it's 1/3 of the amount remaining on the deal. There's the other buyout amount if a player is 26 or older, and it's 2/3 of the deal, which in this case is many, many millions of dollars. And depending when the Stanley Cup ends, as Hart detailed on a couple posts yesterday, it could depend what rate they can buy them out at. And so I think that I'm pretty comfortable saying that if it's the 2/3 amount, I don't think it makes sense. There's just not enough savings there. You're better either to try to trade him and retain salary, or take back a contract, or just rehabilitate him. Try to bet on him making improvements, having a big summer, getting more comfortable in his environment, all those things. And so I understand the discussion around it, because, it was just there's no way to defend the season he had. There's nothing to say about Pierre-Luc Dubois' season other than it was a massive disappointment for a team that made a big trade for him, signed him to that 8-year contract. He was supposed to be a difference maker for them, and he just didn't make the difference in the right ways this year. But it's hard to even contemplate having money on your books for 14 seasons. Teams are wary of having it on for like 3 seasons if you're retaining in a trade. To have 14 years of dead cap, even if it's not significant in each of those years, is a lot. But if it is that 1/3 buyout, if the Stanley Cup ends, say, on June 18th, and there's time to buy him out for that 1/3 amount, there's going to be a real decision to be made there. And let's see what the Kings front office looks like. I mean, there's certainly some talk that change could be in the offing in Los Angeles. After, a 3rd straight first round loss to Edmonton, kind of tough for them. We talk about a tough first round draw for Winnipeg. Getting Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl 3 straight springs hasn't been too kind to the Kings, but it does feel as though their rebuild is kind of stalled a little bit. They haven't kept climbing forward. And then, the Dubois move was the biggest decision the franchise made last summer, and it completely blew up in their faces. So let's see how the decision-making facet of that organization looks, when it comes time to make that decision in June. But certainly, they finished the year with Jim Hiller as an interim coach. There's a coaching decision to be made. Not to say it won't be Hiller, but they have to work through that. They have to see if there's any changes to the front office, and then ultimately, somewhere around the middle to late June, there's a big decision that's pending on what to do with Dubois.
We'll see about that. And we wrap up this week's episode with Stick Taps. And it's been a week since we lost a legend, and we have not discussed his passing on this show. Bob Cole, the legendary play-by-play man. If you've watched hockey at any point in your life, you have heard his voice. That's how long and wide-spanning his career was covering the game. And I think it's only fitting that we give him the ultimate stick tap on today's edition of the CJ Show. Just the fact that he has meant so much for so many hockey fans, ourselves included. We have to give him that respect, Siege.
Are you kidding? I mean, he's the soundtrack of hockey in my mind. Like, when I think of hockey, I think of Bob Cole's voice. I think of, when I was a kid, the Leafs won a series in 93 against the Red Wings. They weren't expected to win. And it's like, this has been an unbelievable turn of events. The Leafs move on and the Red Wings have been eliminated. I think back to like 30 people in my parents' living room the day that Canada plays the gold medal game in Salt Lake City. And it's Joe Sakic.
Gio Sakic.
Like,
that's gotta be it.
Think about it. Like, oh, baby. Like, there's so many catchphrases that you can just draw to your mind. You almost don't even, like, it sounds weird because I actually know the man a little bit. And obviously I've had the chance to meet him. I was a colleague of his when I worked at Sportsnet when he was still in the booth. But you almost don't think of him as a person. Like, it's like he's part of the game, right? He's part of the fabric of what you remember about the sport. It's why I want to give a stick tap as well to Jack Edwards. Very polarizing, very different play-by-play guy. But he called his last game for the Bruins telecast. And I know for people that grew up in the New England area that followed that team, he was a voice. He was part of what brought them into the sport. And absolutely a Bruins homer, absolutely had his moments where you shake your head at some of the stuff he said, whether it was the whole Pat Maroon thing years ago or some of the stuff he's commented on referees. But I mean, he's part of selling the sport in Boston. And even Joe Bowen, who, if you caught his radio call last night on the Leafs, sending this to Game 7, I mean, to put bookends on everything, he had quite a call on the Nylander second goal on the breakaway. We're going back to Boston, buddy, and this time we're going to finish the job.
Call yesterday.
And so, I'm just thinking of both those two in the context of Bob Cole, because, most people don't go to the games, right? Most people that are fans engage it through, some form of media where you have a voice, telling you what's happening, describing, bringing the emotion to the game. And no one listening to Bob Cole call a game, it was like music. It was art. And, I'm glad he had a long life. I'm glad he worked, he worked really up until the last couple of years here. And, I don't think he ever wanted to retire, but he got to do it for a really long time. And, it's a shame he's gone. I'd love to hear him call Saturday's game. I say that with no disrespect to Chris Cuthbert and any of the other announcers that will be in the booth actually calling the game, but just because the sentimentalist in me, that's how I hear hockey. I'd love to hear one more call of a big game from Bob.
Yeah, and what a Game 7 that would have been for him to call. We all miss Bob Cole. Yeah, what a loss, but what a life. Anyway, that's going to do it for today's edition of the CJ Show. We'll be back on Monday. Get your questions in, whether on Twitter or Discord. Ask CJ. Use the hashtag if you can. Siege.
Wait a minute.
Safe travels to Boston.
What do you mean, wait a minute? I need a prediction from you.
You want a prediction from me? I was going to spare you.
Where am I going to be on Monday? The two answers are I'm either back here working out of the home office because the Bruins have won Game 7, or I will be beachside in Fort Lauderdale preparing for Game 1 of the second round series. Where's CJ?
I said Bruins
Answer that question.
I said Bruins in 7.
You're sticking to it.
I think I'm going to stick to it. You're coming back to the home studio on Monday. But if you're beachside, I think a lot of Leafs fans would be very excited about that.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm zen either way. I've got 2 flight options. I've got a great life. I'm excited to go to a Game 7. So it's not like I'm not pulling for one outcome or the other. I just wanted to see as a neutral where you stood on that series.
I'm just going to stand on. I'll say this. I'm not as confident about the Bruins winning in 7 as I was at the beginning of this series. I'll stick with it because that's what I said at the beginning. I'm not confident.
Yeah, it hasn't played out quite like you'd expect, right? I mean, Boston.
No.
But they haven't dominated too much. I mean, look, I guess it's 2 close teams, and it's not the same Bruins it has been. We didn't get to that really, and we were talking about it in the show, but these aren't. It's not the same Bruins of the years gone by, right? They're salary cap, age, they're and Pasternak got called out. Do we even mention?
Oh
that?
Man, we did. I thought we were going to touch on that, but we can touch on that really quickly here. But what did you think of that?
It's a risky play. I certainly behind the scenes, by all means, because Jim Montgomery is not off base. Like Pasta does have to step up. He and Marchand really are their 2 driving forces offensively. Marchand's had moments. He's had some big games and is part of the reason that they get to Game 7. But, you're waiting for the Pasta game a little bit if you're on the Bruins end of it. But to do it publicly the way he did, I love it. It's just one more storyline now to follow. But, it can go one of 2 ways because, to me, and I don't know anything, but it looks like Pasta could be injured too, right? Like he's just not skating the way you're used to seeing him. He's not been dynamic. The Leafs have played him physical right through the series. Simon Benoit has delivered some big punishing hits on Pasternak in the series. But, Jim Montgomery, you only have so many bullets as a coach, right? And he's not a coach that's been known to call out his top players. And so maybe he gets the response he wants, or who knows? It might this is the beauty. And it's the coach's job to have a feel for that, to have a sense for how players will respond. But I'm fascinated to see it. And really on the Leafs end, we didn't talk about Mitch Marner, but you had a Matthews game from Toronto in this, Tavares has really stepped up. You had a Nylander game. Will you get a Marner game in Game 7? I mean, that's a storyline from Toronto that I'm curious to see. I mean, between Pasternak or Marner, it wouldn't surprise me if we're talking about one of those guys that's having a big night in Game 7 and helping extend his team season. So, just something to keep in mind as you might be listening to this after Game 7 or heading into it on Saturday as you're walking your dog today. But mark it down. Julian calls Bruins in 7.
What about you? What do you think is going to happen then?
I'm making no predictions. I have seriously.
Oh, what you want me to just make a prediction? Just fall. Oh,
okay, well then I'll take Toronto.
I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna.
I'll stick with the momentum.
Okay, I'm not gonna complain.
But I will say I already made my prediction. I already wrote 1,000 words saying the season's over for the Leafs, basically. So
I concede that point.
So my point is I've already been wrong. I've already eaten my words, and now I'm just wow, I have no idea. Clearly my feel for things was off base, but I'm going to say, if we have to make a prediction, that the momentum stays in the Leafs' favor, that they've unlocked something, that they've got the fresher goaltender, that they have figured out how to play, and that they're going to find a way to go to Florida. Man, whichever team comes out of this, Florida is just sitting there rested and looking like a ferocious beast.
Like food. These teams look like
I will
food
say
for
this:
Florida,
if you want a
as far as I'm
prediction for the
concerned.
second round, whoever comes out of this is going to be an underdog to the Panthers. There's no question
Absolutely.
about that.
For sure. This concludes the extended outro edition of CJ Show. I didn't expect these extra points to come in.
Well,
What a great show.
Thanks for keeping it short. I got to fly. Thanks for your patience to our audience. Monday, we'll give you the real goods.
Oh, for sure. Peace, guys.
The Chris Johnston Show. Inside the game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK McKenzie.